Stephen, let's put things in perspective and talk a little bit about your work with regards to giants. And in some cases, how big did these giants that apparently roamed the planet thousands of years ago get?
Well, giving you an overview, George, let me put this into perspective, too, for the listeners. We're not talking hundreds of reports. We're not talking thousands. We're literally talking 10,000s of reports. Everything from skeletons being found and eyewitness accounts of everything from 17 feet all the way up to skeletons that have been found of 98 feet, which even syncs with some of the Greek myths of the Cyclops and other myths of not only Rome, the Babylonians. The Epic of Gilgamesh, we've got to go here because this is a fascinating story.
Sure.
When people have seen the Sumerian tomb and the Sumerian etchings in the different rocks and different structures, they always see these gentlemen that are giants holding lions by their rear hind legs. One of the most famous stories that, the mainstream world poo-pooed was the fact that there was a gentleman named Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh was written by a Middle Eastern scholar 2,500 years before the birth of Jesus Christ, and it commemorated the life of the ruler of the city of Uruk, U-R-U-K, which we get the name Iraq from.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's fascinating about that, everybody poo-pooed this, they'll accept the fact that it was the poem or a narrative maybe from that time, but there was no such thing as giants. There's no such thing as two-thirds God, one-third human. But a German-led expedition discovered what was thought to be the entire city of Uruk, including where the Euphrates River once flowed. And what's fascinating is they found the tomb of Gilgamesh. This was carried on the BBC on April 29, 2003. So what's fascinating, we're finding more and more things that are poo-pooed and dismissed coming right into the forefront. And what's really fascinating is after you and I did our last interview months and months ago, or whenever it was on giants, I was contacted by one of your listeners, George, who was with the SWAT department of a major California city. And he said, Steve, I want you to know something. He said, I was listening to you and George talk tonight, and I was out hunting in the Sierra Nevadas. He said, I heard and saw something come through the trees with such a shrill scream. He said, it made my hair stand on end. He says, I don't scare easily. But he said what he noticed were the trees that were absolutely being mowed over by this thing. And his estimation was the thing had to be between 10 and 12 feet. So this is, a fascinating story. We start pulling all the stories together. Most people don't understand that some of the most famous people in history were in the 8 and 9 foot round. Let me give you a good example.
Sure. And also, do you remember the email we got also from a soldier in Afghanistan where they were chasing this giant into a cave? Remember? I'll let you talk about that in a moment. Go ahead.
Well, let's just run through some famous guys that people don't realize were giants that have come right through history. Frederick III, the father of Charlemagne. Charlemagne himself was a giant. King Arthur was believed just to be fantasy until his tomb was found in the history and the historic records of it. We've got Maximinius, who is actually one of the Roman leaders who basically, if they go to my website, stevequayle.com, and click on the giants, or just go to the Coast to Coast page that my webmaster, Holly Deo, designs just for your show, George, they can see an artist sketch of what Maximinius looked like. I mean, we're talking about famous people and famous in history. Then we've got the situation where over and over and over, the famous Gog and Magog giants of the British Isles. Most people don't understand this. Biblically, Gog and Magog is a war that does arise in the Middle East with all the different people that are associated with it, nations associated with the coming Gog-Magog war. But most people don't understand those were two giants who were ultimately put down by a man named Brutus, and Brutus was from Troy. And most people would find this fascinating, that the word London means New Troy. So we've got words that have passed into our usage. We've got all of the fascinating British Isle myths, Jack the Giant Killer, Jack and the Beanstalk. Jack was an individual in the folklore that basically was the one that took on the giants. We've got Finn McCoo. We've got Bran. We've got all of these heroic figures, and some of these guys, and whether people want to acknowledge it or not, we're talking, sometimes 30 and 40 feet tall, 30 30 and 40 feet tall.
My gosh, that might explain if they were around during the era of the pyramids. Maybe then I could understand how they could move those blocks.
Well, absolutely. If you go to Baalbek, and what's fascinating about this is the greatest megalithic structures in the world. Some of these things weigh, like, for instance, in Baalbek, which is in the Bekaa Valley, what's fascinating is the stone of the pregnant woman weighs 1,000 tons, and it's perfectly quarried. And most people can't even begin to imagine that giants of that size have phenomenal strength. For instance, 1699, here's an interesting guy, William Joyce. King William invites him to Kensington Palace, and Joyce lifted a ton, easily, 2,000 pounds. The king had a weight made for him. And then if that wasn't enough, Joyce could uproot large trees by pulling them up by the roots. You got to put a tractor on them. And, I mean, this is all history recorded stuff. And then if that wasn't enough, the king put teams of horses to pull on Joyce with a rope that he had specially made, and the team of horses couldn't absolutely pull this guy. And this guy was only about 9 feet tall. We've got Machnau, the Russian giant, in contemporary times, 9 feet 3. We've got Iseret, the giant who was. These are all people from history, 20 feet tall. And what's fascinating, when you get to the Bekaa Valley, the Valley of the Rephaim, or the Valley of the Giants, you go to Hebron. These are all Middle East. The cities that are in the news right now. That was the city of the numerous Anakim giants, or the Canaanites. And what's fascinating about this is, you and I talked about this on one of your shows, is that Pursuit magazine, is no longer in publication, 1973, stated that giant human skeletons were found with horns. Now, another coast-to-coast listener who was listening to us in Fiji called me after the show that we did about a year ago, and unfortunately, I think he died in the all that bombing in Fiji. But the point is, he said, Steve, we have a 12-foot giant with horns. Now, again, people think, oh, this is just crazy, blah, blah, blah. You could maybe dismiss 3, 5, 100, 200 stories, but when they're independent and they come from every corner of the world, they come from every nook and cranny, every tribe, the central theme is that the gods came, had sex, the gods, the fallen ones, came, had sex with earth women, produced giants, which became the mythological heroes of old. And we've seen now, we're getting reports, George, of these entities coming out. In Brazil, for instance, what are called the Corinacores. In 1970, there was a film that was made about these guys, and I think it was called something like Hidden from Man, or no, the tribe that was hidden from man.
And apparently these were all over the planet, right?
All
these
over
giants.
the planet. There is no place that is exempt from skeletal remains. There's just no place I've been able to find. You go to the tip of South America, Patagonia. You've got, obviously, all of the circumnavigators from Magellan, Vespucci. You've got Coronado, De Soto. You've got all of the guys that were out looking for the gold and the fountain of youth, and the people that sailed around the world, all encountering them. I got to share this with you. It's fascinating. After you and I typically do a show, within about a couple weeks, sometimes a History Channel or somebody will come on and they'll get experts that will try and dispute this, that, oh, these guys were just really not humans. These are large animal bones.
Right.
Even though on my website I have an actual, not a reproduction, an actual Magellanic account of him encountering the Patagonia Giants. And these weren't just guys. Patagonia, by the way, means big feet. And I don't think people recognize the fact that you cannot get so many independent verifications, absolute eyewitness, written accounts. These guys were so specific and detailed that it went literally to the toenail, to the tip of their tooth, when the descriptions were being penned even 300 years ago.